We're going to get cracking here. All right. So Charlie made sure to get to the beach that fateful night. Extra early. All right. A whole ton of J-coin. Well, there you go. You can just collect it like Pokemon cards or something. You don't have to. You don't not have to burn a hole in your pocket. Save it up for when the market spikes, and you can really sell that stuff for something. Charlie made sure to get to the beach that fateful night extra early. Roll it up and smoke it. That's Frank's advice for everything, actually. All right. He could still meet her, and everything could work out fine. But it took a bit more effort. It took a bit more effort. Not that I condone that sort of behavior. Of course, we don't want to assume anything about Mr. Frank here. He could still meet her, and everything could work out fine. But it took a bit more effort to win her over. If he missed this magic moment. I'm going to take a close look at what the black and white pictures that Armand is sharing there. All right. Guess it was bouncing around the screen for everybody too. Something about that restaurant bar, quiet music, the wind off the water, lights strung out above them, and probably who they were at that exact moment made all the difference. He was always tempted to try to meet her sooner each time. But the age difference made that gamble quite awkward. The relationship with her father was never quite the same. If he stepped into her life. That's Mary the kitten, Jay. We will be sleeping with at MondoCon. I don't think so, man. I think I can get a medical exemption from cats right now. The relationship with her father was never quite the same if he stepped into her life before this night. Let's say, so he picked his moment, walked up to her on the hard sands under those lights and introduced himself. He was quite practiced at this and rarely messed it up anymore. All the years he waited for her paid off again. This was really where life began. They finished college, got engaged, and were married at the same church as the first time. Alright, Tom Duffy. Been finishing a short story. My goal is to finish it during this stream, and by short, I've written several short stories in my time. I mean probably 5K. Well, that's still a short story. I thought you were talking maybe it was like 10,000, 15,000, 17,000 words. I used to have a joke that occasionally I ended up writing medium long stories instead of short stories. But 5K is a perfectly good short story. 5K is kind of right there in the wheelhouse of what a lot of publishers look for. I can't seem to write anything shorter than that and be happy with it. Maybe I need to start later in the story. Well, that's always the case. I've said this several times before, but Max Booth III, who's a quite accomplished writer, one of his biggest editing notes for me and every other writer is to start the story later. So probably just in the story that I've written, he might cut out those first two paragraphs and get on. I don't know, though, with the way this one works out, but he always says to cut from the beginning. So you cut every paragraph that you don't need, that doesn't absolutely necessary for the story. If there's a piece of backstory or something like that, just see if you can plug that in somewhere else in the story, and then you get to the one paragraph that absolutely can't be cut. And for him, that's typically where the story begins, and usually that's on some kind of action. So probably in this story, where I'm going to get to the first scene break, he would probably start the story there. But again, there's nothing wrong with a 5,000 word story. In fact, there are a number of publishers that's exactly what they want. Because, if 5,000 or 6,000 is their limit, they end up getting a lot of 2,000 and 3,000 word stories. And a lot of times a couple longer ones is good for them. But again, the best story you can tell in the shortest space is probably the strongest story ultimately. But again, 5,000 words is sort of a sweet spot for a lot of people. I always say just make it as long as you need it to tell the story. They finished college, got engaged, were married in the same church as the first time. Once he set up for a destination wedding. It was a logistical nightmare. They still cherished I need to add something here because I haven't used her name yet. How many kidneys does Max Booth have? Just the two that I'm aware of, and I'm not even sure what condition those are in. As far as I know, he's never opened up to actually see them. All right. The relationship with her father was never quite the same after that. So he picked this moment. Then there she was. Tara stood right before him, just like the first time he ever saw her in this light. Alright, someone was trying to call me. That's probably one of my doctors, but they'll have to leave a message. Okay. Just like the first time he saw her in this moment, it never got old for him. Never. All right, so he picked his moment, walked up to her on the hard sand under those lights, and introduced himself. He was quite practiced at this and rarely messed it up anymore. All the years he waited for her paid off again. This was really where life began. They finished college, got engaged, were married at the same church as the first time. Once he set up for a destination wedding, it was a logistical nightmare. They still cherished those memories, but it was hard on the people. It was hard on some of the people they loved, having all their friends and family there. Just killed off a character named Armand. Shouldn't I get paid extra for that? Oh my goodness. Armand, how do you feel about that? I assume that's a tribute, but you never know. You got to keep an eye on Tom. Having all their friends and family there meant so much more. Tara loved the wedding each time, but when they got older, they would agree the money wasn't worth it. They always married young, though. This time around, Charlie delayed getting diagnosed. He knew what it would mean. But Armand, I have killed Tom Duffy a dozen times, all with him crying pathetically and begging for his... Oh my goodness. Armand is very vindictive in his fiction. In fact, it's more important for him to get revenge than it is for him to meet the word count or the deadlines. Tom sounds true to life. Yeah, I feel that too. If you write me into a story, guys, I can die just fine on my own. You don't need to help me along. I got all sorts of things going on. This time around, Charlie delayed getting diagnosed. He knew what it would mean, but she had missed out on some of her dream trips in the past, and he wanted her to have one round where it all came true. He knew she wouldn't remember like him. He knew she wouldn't remember like him. He knew she wouldn't remember like him, like he could, let's say. And what followed might sour those memories. But he still felt it was worth it at least once. Okay. They took the whirlwind tour. Then he waited long enough that the two events wouldn't be linked in her mind. Once they found once they found the problem, on his next checkup, the recovery was much harder on his body. He survived it and endured all the pain and treatments with her by his side. That bought him a few more years in their old age. But he knew what was coming. This time, she got there in time to say goodbye. He whispered in her ear, "I'll see you again." No, we'll meet again under those magic lights. And he meant it, just like every other time. All right. Scene break. Now we're going to bring back an old friend from another story. No, hold on. Make that in the center. Okay. Charlie woke easy in the take-in area. Waldo, what's that? No. No, Waldo's not in this story. All right, Charlie woke easy in the take-in area and gripped the familiar arms of his leather chair. Cassingill sat across from him at the desk. He still had his hat, and that Charlie still had his hat, and that let's say Cassingill still had his hat and that brown suit, but his beard had been cut down to the mustache, curled at the ends. They were in some sort of alcove, some sort of dark alcove off the factory floor. Charlie turned in his seat and saw the factory outside. Let's say saw the massive factory outside the open back wall, and heard the giant machines working away. Did you graduate to to your own space?" Charlie asked. Cassingale sighed and said, "No, we had a huge leak. Oil everywhere. It's taking forever to clean up. Still don't get exactly what all those machines do." Cassingale: "It's the machinery of the universe. Just as hard to explain as every other time." Well, Charlie turned forward. "Let's get this done, shall we?" Charlie, Charlie, Charlie. What's on your mind, Cassingale? I suppose asking you what you want to do with your next life is just a formality, as always. Charlie smiled. Like the machinery of the universe, it must keep going. Almost poetic, Charlie. You do know that many of the things you wish to fix about your life are adjusted in the next one, should you choose to move on. Charlie crossed his leg, stared at Cassingale's mustache, and waited. You're not even going to consider it. Charlie shrugged. There is nothing wrong with the life I have had. Cassingale said. Charlie smiled. And will have again. Of course, you can go back and repeat the same life. There is a flaw, though. All right. Tom says, here's an interesting fact, possibly only interesting to me. Well, it has to be interesting to somebody, right? The character I wrote for Nano Book was based on someone from a long time ago in my past. I ran into her on Monday randomly. Uh-oh. Where's this going to go? I told her about the book, left out all the bad stuff, though. Don't want to be ran away. Didn't want her to go run away screaming. Well, that's funny. Maybe you drew her back into your life, man. I don't know if that's good for you, good for her, or good for neither of you. I think that qualifies as an interesting fact. Of course, you can go back and repeat the same life. There is that flaw, though. You're not supposed to remember. Not as completely. Jay says it's interesting, so it is, Armand says. All right, Armand's stuck with my judgment, I guess. You're not supposed to remember, not as well, not as completely, let's say, as you do. The human mind is not supposed to recall so many versions of the same life. It's the same flaw that kills you every time and leaves her a widow for so many years. How long does she go without me? You know, I can't answer that, Charlie. Then you need to stop bringing it up. What you call a flaw is all I ever want. So go through the motions. Fill out the paperwork. Because I'm going round again. Cassingale relented, as he always did. Then Charlie stepped into the light to be born again. All right. Okay. Charlie usually started to remember his past lives between 4 and 6 years old. During those years, he'd say and do things that usually got him sent to a child therapist. As the memories really started to fall into place, I don't need a comma there. As the memories usually started to fall into place, he remembered enough to stop talking. No more strange predictions. No more cryptic sayings. No more cryptic messages beyond his years. No more walking around the house searching for a ghost named Tara. He just got better, played it cool, and things went back to normal. Typically, he started doing much better in school. He'd lived this life. He lived this life hundreds of times. So elementary math and reading was a breeze. Sometimes he let himself get placed into the smart classes. Other times he held back because ultimately school was boring for him now. He just started reading more books in his spare time. The advanced classes were more work for no real reward in his view. He had to hide the advanced books. He picked up from the library. He had to hide the advanced books he picked up from the library, pretending they were for his dad. This time, Charlie arranged to meet Tara early. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy because he was in middle school. He was in middle school when she was still in elementary. And they were only in high school. And they were only in high school 1 year together. So Charlie got into theater. He made sure to get a part, to get a backstage part in the one acts. And he met her as a freshman in high school. They talked, but let's not do a comma there. They talked, but didn't really try to strike anything up. He stayed in touch with her. Not as easy before email and cell phones were as common. He had to hear about her old boyfriends in real time. He feared being put into the friend zone. But only a little. They were always meant to be. He dated a little this time around too. He never let himself get close. In a few past lives, girls started falling for him, and he reached a point he had to really break their hearts. They were never going to be the one for him. It scared him to think that they could be. He could try out a life with one of them. Tara would go on to make someone else happy. She would have children with them. They might both be happy. No zombies in this story? No, I'm afraid not. Hello, and this one's just about someone reliving his life over and over. It's actually a Valentine's gift from my wife that I'm doing. They might both find wonderful lives apart, but it wouldn't be Tara. It wouldn't be right. Children were tricky. Some lifetimes they had them, and others they didn't. Sometimes they had the same names as previous lives, but they were different kids. Sometimes girls and sometimes boys. Charlie told himself they went on to Get Jay to tell a fun fact. All right, let me finish this paragraph real quick. All right. Charlie told himself they went on to get, went on to have their own lives and their own afters. Cass and Gale, at the end of each life, told her, hinted to as much without really saying it, without really saying so. He loved their children, whoever they turned out to be. Okay, fun fact. All right, hold on here. All right. My grandfather and father both worked with selling car batteries most of their lives. My dad jumped around from a lot of different jobs. My grandfather worked at some of the same old car battery companies that my father did, but those places just seemed to constantly be closed and taken over. And for a while, they ran some battery companies together. Small outfits that they were selling batteries in Georgia and Florida. My dad both of them worked really, really hard all their lives. So, like, as a kid, I looked at how they worked and I was like, oh man, working is the worst, because they worked these incredibly long hours. And especially when my dad was in sales for battery companies, he would travel a lot. So he'd be gone from home for extended periods of time. And, so, like, all my life, I kind of dreaded work just because it always looked backbreaking to me. Like, to me, that's how it always looked. Because I saw both of them doing that kind of stuff, and one of my uncles too. My assumption was that work was just terrible. That's just the way it worked out, no matter what job you picked, which may be kind of true. But as they kind of got sick and had to get away from work, they started to learn to enjoy their lives a good bit more, I think. And then, of course, as I got older, I kind of figured out that, like, that's not how life had to be. Like, you could pick jobs that weren't backbreaking and do what you wanted to do. I was a teacher for a while, which probably fell closer to that breaking your back selling car batteries kind of lifestyle. And then I ended up, becoming full-time as a writer, and saw that you could make a life that you actually enjoyed and that kind of thing. So if I'd followed in their footsteps, I might have been running around selling car batteries until one of my health issues brought me down the way it did them. But that's where I come from. I come from a family of car battery salespeople. All right. He loved their children, whoever they turned out to be. This time, under the lights on the sand, it was like a reunion. Charlie, Tempest says, for 4 years I've been trying to switch from normal job to writing, but all signs point to no. Well, it isn't easy. I remember those last few years of teaching, I just it was always this thing that, like, if I just have this thing happen, or this thing happen, or this thing happen with writing, that everything will be okay and I can switch my life over. And of course, like, writing is just a constant grind. So there's never really that moment where it's like, oh, this big thing has fallen in my lap and now I can do it. It's not, I never had a moment like Stephen King selling Carrie and then suddenly he can quit all those other jobs. In my case, it's just one of my sons got sick and one of us had to stay home with him. And so I took that opportunity to give up my job. And there was really no metric that said that I was in any place to work full time. And looking back at the stories I was writing back then, especially where I sit now, I can't believe I survived it all, because like I was not the kind of writer then that I am now. But I did it. I made that leap partly because of other circumstances that presented itself for that. And once I left my day job, I told my wife that I can always go back to teaching. So if I take a year off, we take care of our son who's sick, then at any point I can go back. And but I had no intention of going back. So I put everything I had into writing. I looked for ways to diversify. I ended up ghostwriting a good bit, which helped pay the bills for a while. But it was always a grind. It was always one of those things where like I was scraping together the money for rent and utilities and all that stuff, and sometimes not paying on time and all that kind of stuff. And my own health issues started to become a thing too. But as I kind of went along, I just kept finding ways to survive, ways to make it work. And now, even now, I look for those things. Sometimes they pay off. Sometimes you have to abandon them and go to another path. So, Twitch is part of that for me. Patreon is part of that for me. Staff writing that I do for Stillwater Bay, for Crystal Lake, for Lit Reactor. I still do a little bit of freelance and ghostwriting as well. For a while there, my book sales income had kind of ballooned to a point where we were real comfortable. That's kind of contracted a little bit, partly because my own health and cognitive issues make it to where I can't work the algorithms as well as I used to. But other streams of income have increased and building on them, and sort of just made a situation where I'm living comfortably now. Now, part of living comfortably as a full-time writer for me is shrinking unimportant parts of my life. So like typically your life is going to expand to your paycheck. So whatever extra amount of money you make, quote unquote extra, as seldom as that's a thing in our lives, your life will expand to that. And so you never really have extra. So as we scaled back when I left my teaching job, it's pretty amazing when you really start cutting how many things are wants as opposed to necessities. Now, you can argue that, there's certain things you want in life or that make your life comfortable or all that kind of stuff. But the more and more of that stuff you can strip away, the leaner you can live, the more money you can have. Now, there's always the thing. I used to joke that every time I made a little extra money, and it really felt like this when I was writing, because sometimes I would have a windfall of thousands of dollars from a particular sale or something. I would always joke that money was for something, for a disaster that I didn't realize was coming yet, because it would always be like the car breaks down or the roof needs to be fixed on the house or any of those kind of things. And whatever, one time a tree fell in the house. Whatever those that extra money came in for, it ended up going. Now, eventually I kind of got out of that mindset and just realized that, life keeps coming at you. So even when you save money, something will come up. But if you keep doing it consistently, then eventually you go along and you're doing fine. And we're kind of in that place now over the last few years, but it was a lot of hard work to get there. But all that to say, you can make either choice you want. And as you said, the signs may be pointing to no right now. So now may not be the time. But there may come a time that you decide to take a leap and go for that. And there may be no evidence that it's the right choice at that particular moment, but you go for it anyway. And worst case is that it really doesn't work out and you just have to go back to some other job situation, that kind of thing. I never advise anyone to quit their job, just because we had a lot of close calls in the sense of money got very, very tight and we didn't know where it was going to come from. And it looked like the smart thing to do was to quit the full-time writing and go back to some sort of job. And then something came through and it worked out for us. And I know that's not a way to plan your life, really. But if there comes a point where you feel like you want to take the leap, you can, and you just have to see if that's the right time for you. And there's nothing wrong with not choosing not to do that. So if because the finances never make sense. Like the whole time I've been writing full time, none of it makes sense. None of the data lines up. None of the things I got projected out say that this should keep working, but it does anyway, kind of thing. So if you're in a situation where you continue the day job and are writing, there's no shame in that. There's no like I failed at my dream kind of thing. It's just you're at a different phase of the dream than the one you may think you want to be at. So don't ever kind of look at it as sort of your life is on hold while you are working towards this other thing. If you're doing the thing that you love, if writing is the thing that you want to do, and eventually you'd like to be a full-time writer, then don't look at the time that you're working the day job and writing when you can find the time as any sort of failure. This is just the stage you're at, and so you're putting in the work now to potentially have what you want down the road. You may decide to take a leap and leave that job before the signs point to it, and that's fine. You may decide to keep working until you reach a certain financial stage where it's a wiser choice to change at that point. It may be a thing you have to wait for longer, but again, there's nothing wrong with that either. The problem only comes in if you feel like it doesn't count until you reach that stage. And so all the days, months, weeks, years leading up to that feel like a dream deferred or life in limbo. So don't let your life be that. But if that's something you want down the road, kind of be open to the idea that there may come a moment or an opportunity where you can make that leap of faith, even when not every single sign is lined up yet. So again, all that to say that it's okay to be in a stage earlier than the one you think you're meant for eventually, and it's also okay at some point to make a gamble on yourself if the opportunity presents itself. All right, I skipped over a bunch of messages here. 4 years I've been trying to switch from normal job to writing, but all signs point to no. That's what we just talked about. Tom came in. You just keep trying, even if it never works out. You keep trying, and you know that you never gave up. And of course, never is a long time. So just, it's surprising. Like if I look back on years past, there were years where I was healthier, but I was not happier. Like I love the life I have right now, even with everything that's gone wrong in recent days and that kind of thing. I still wouldn't trade where I am for where I used to be. So it wasn't. This is not a position I expected to be in. Like I didn't expect that. I'd be struggling with all these particular health issues, but surviving them and be perfectly happy, writing on stream and all this stuff that I do now. So, in terms of like getting ready for the future, you don't really know what it's going to look like. You know what you want. But even when life hands you your dream, it usually looks different than you think it's going to look. And most of the time, I think it's better. So like that achievement of the reality, even when it doesn't match up to everything you wanted, even when it doesn't, even when it's not the sky, pie in the sky view that you have of it, typically I think it's better. Like I think you see that like, okay, what I have and what I've built to and what I'm still going to is going to be great there. Yeah, that is the plan. Just had 18 weeks pass from my full manuscript request, and their auto response says if 18 weeks pass, it is a no. Yeah, those are the fun ones. You get up into a certain stratosphere of publisher, and you're in that situation. So kind of depressing. Yes, the key in a situation like that when you're waiting for, I assume this is a big fish. Like this is. When you have a publisher that's on that 18 week thing, or even some of them are months, you're going for the whale, which I think is good. I think that's how you dream. And even if it gets rejected or that kind of thing, you just keep going. And in the meantime, you write something else. Like you're working on the next thing. And I was at a convention back before the world was covered in plague, and there was some top range authors that were getting ready in the room that I was setting up my table in. And both of them had been bestsellers at different times. And they were talking about the fact that it always starts over. So when they make that bestseller, it's not that they write the next book and it becomes a bestseller. It's like starting over. They start over from scratch and have to kind of claw their way back there as if they'd never been there before. Now, you could look at that and that might sound depressing, like, oh, even when you get there, you don't really get there. But from my viewpoint, I kind of saw that as a positive in the sense that, like, even those guys who've become bestsellers and do this full time and all that, every day is still starting over. So I took comfort in that from the standpoint of, like, I'm good at the grind. Like, I'm good at getting out there and starting over day one of the next work and doing my best with it, and then fighting to get it to a publisher and fighting to get people to buy it and read it and all that kind of stuff. Like, that part I'm good at. It was just becoming a bestseller or whatever it is that I haven't achieved yet. But from that idea that even they have to start back over, I took comfort in that from the standpoint of, like, okay, all the work I've put in to grind this out day after day and starting over every time, that's what I need if I ever get to that particular level. So there's no, like, magic platform that you arrive at and then suddenly all the things you had to go through before fall away. It's like all that work you put in, working while you're waiting to hear something back, working after you get a rejection, all that kind of stuff is what you need in order to reach that point and then keep going in it. So none of it's wasted. None of it's wasted time. If this is a dream you're going after, then all the work you're putting in now, when you feel like you're not there, is what you need to hold on to it once you do get there, I guess. Amazing how many big authors have day jobs and always will. Not many full-time authors, especially in horror. No, that is true. And there's and I'm sure Armand's not going to mind me saying this. Armand's kind of at a level of success that I think is above me, especially when you start running the numbers and stuff. But both of us would kind of agree that there's authors that are much more successful than us by every metric who still work a day job. And they choose to do that because there's a certain lifestyle they want. So even though they're getting in money from writing that we would marvel at, they still want a particular size of lifestyle that their day job allows them in combination with the writing. Armand and I, on the other hand, have chosen, different paths that allow us to be full time, but we might not have, everything that those authors have, or we worked harder to open other avenues of revenue that allow us to live the way we want. My path to that just started with living leaner. So there's a lot of things in life that I don't consider all that important, so I don't waste money on them. Recently, we started taking more trips and things like that to kind of build memories for the kids and that kind of thing. But in terms of just buying stuff and getting the biggest of whatever, bigger houses, any of that kind of stuff, me and my family have chosen to forego that so that we could sort of live the lifestyle we wanted in terms of our job, but kind of live on less. So, smaller house, not as many bells and whistles of things. If it's a thing that we can do without, we do without it. Now we've expanded beyond that a little bit. We live a little bigger than we used to. But if we ever had to pull back for financial reasons, we're well fit to do that. I just want to be able to afford to eat a bunch of good food and sit at home. See, eating good food, that's where it's the food and gasoline that is that rock star lifestyle that you just have to do without when you're a writer. Luxuries like food, gasoline, and heat, you don't really need it. I'm joking, of course. As I turn off my heat. All right. Again, feel free to ask questions or talk anytime you want. I don't mind dropping in just for conversation as we go along here. This time under the lights on the sand, it was like a reunion. Charlie feared she might not choose him since he was already in a different place in her life. but things worked out like they were meant to. They had their church wedding, their kids, and their life together. Charlie got his diagnosis earlier. They were able to help him. They were able to help him live longer. A little longer, anyway. All right. But he did have to live with it longer. Tara did too. He saw more age on her by the time he passed. Charlie whispered in her ear, "I love our life together. I would choose no other." Cassengale's desk was back in the middle of the factory floor. They must have gotten that oil spill cleaned up. Cassengale had his beard again, too. He held up Charlie's folder and said, "I have everything in place." All right. He held up Charlie's folder and said, "I have everything in place." I can't fill it out until you get here each time. If you changed your mind, just let me know, Charlie. I'm ready to start again. I figured you would be. Charlie didn't date much this time around. He started playing around with making short films. He got into podcasting way ahead of everyone else. He considered maybe stealing ideas for books or songs before other people could write them, but he never could bring himself to do that to someone. All right. His accurate predictions on his podcast made him quite popular. And he earned a good living early. He earned a good living early on the ad revenue. All right. I think you guys are talking among yourselves, but I'm going to jump in anyway. All right, Tom said, I would think that initially you would need a day job or a nest egg to pay for things like editing, covers, etc. Unless you sell to publish that does that for you. Publisher that does that for you. I have no idea what editing costs, but I know that good covers aren't cheap. Armand says a good editor is a lot of money too, but long term worth it. Yeah, going into this broke and wanting to self-pub is insane to me. You get what you put your money into, which is part of what keeps the money tight, I think. I tend to pay pretty good money for cover art. I pay pretty well for editing too. So I've had a lot of trouble with editors too, and I'm not going to call anyone out here, but there's been a lot of times that I've paid good money for editing and then got back bad edits, and I kind of had bad luck for a while where I would research an editor, talk to people who'd worked with them before, get good recommendations, and then like the moment I started working with them, like their lives fell apart, and so their work suffered. So I'm not sure if I bring a curse with me, maybe. That wouldn't surprise me a bit. Good editing costs a little bit of money. You start to get to like the range of, say, like $1 for 250 words, and then higher. That's about the range where you're going to get the kind of quality editing that you want. So full-length novel of 50 to 100,000 words, you're looking at a few $100s on editing. But the difference between having a book that's not rife with errors and one that is huge. Now, that being said, sometimes the amount of money doesn't matter, in the sense that, like, even recently I had a book go to an editor or go to a publisher. Their editor was garbage. The book came out full of errors. I had them re-edit it. It still came out with errors, and I had to go through very, very carefully myself to catch everything they had missed. And I still got a few more books coming with that particular publisher. So I have to put in more care with them to be sure that my books are edited correctly than I do on some of my self-published stuff now that I have a pretty good editor that I use on my own. But that's bad editing is kind of the death of literature right now. And I'm starting to go back and I'm rereading old books, and I'm finding typos in those that I didn't notice before. So I think editing issues have just been a huge issue for decades and decades and decades now, and I just didn't notice as much when I was purely a reader. And so, like, I think I'm more sensitive to typos now because I hate them so much when I see them in my own work, when I realize that I missed them, an editor missed them, a publisher missed them. And then, of course, it makes me look bad to a reader who may not choose to get another book. But as I've gone back, I've seen more and more of them. So it's been an ongoing issue. More than anything, what I want from an editor is to get rid of all the typos. Like, I just don't want the errors to be in there. Just about anything else a reader will forgive, but if they keep finding typos, they're more likely to ditch your book. Tempest says, to be fair, I remember seeing some issues when reading big name authors and books. Yes, and I think you see them more now. For example, there's the book The Mist. It's a novella that kind of appears in the middle of a short story collection from Stephen King. I had an old version of that, and then I had a newer version of the story, like a newer print of it. And as I was reading the newer version, I found a typo, and I was like, "Hold on, why is this still here?" Because I mean, this is something that was published, back in the '80s. And I went back to the older version of it, and the typo wasn't there. And I noticed it in some re-releases too. So like, I got a newer release of Firestarter and found typos in that, and then found an older version that didn't have the typos. So as they're kind of copying over these books, typos are getting added in to some of them. So I think it's more of a modern problem, even though it's been around forever. But I do think that probably publishers are cutting costs. They don't have as many copy editors making as many passes over books. So like you said, even some of the big publishers, you're seeing a lot more typos in the work than you have in the past. Tempest says, to be fair, yeah, finding it. Frank is saying, I'm finding that readers seem more forgiving of a limited number of errors since they do seem to be more prevalent lately. Probably. And like, I think the key is limited. Because I have gotten some reviews that said there's a little too many errors in here. Could have used a little more editing, but it didn't take away from it. I don't even like that. Like, I don't even want that in there. I'd like fewer of them. But I think Frank is right in the sense that, like, probably some readers are more forgiving of them because they're finding more of them. That's kind of a bad situation, that like the scale is sliding a little. I'm trying to push back the other way, kind of try to find that editor that's going to catch all my mistakes, which I think obviously is a little bit of a pipe dream because, there's no such thing as perfection. But more than anything, I pay so that I can get an editor to get me as absolutely close to that as I possibly can. All right. His predictions on his podcast made him quite popular, and he earned a good living early on, let's say, with the ad revenue. He wasn't late to the beach that night. Finally, they were together again. Each time was like taking a first breath. A couple weeks later, he suggested they sneak off for a ski trip. They got snowed in, just like he knew they would. As he hoped, they spent a lot of time together in that cabin. And it became one of their cherished memories. He decided he would include the ski trip again next time around. Poor Cassingale. That guy so wanted to move Charlie on to a new life. But he was not through with this one. Not by a long shot. He never grew tired of Tara. Okay, we're going to wrap this up here. All right. Cassingale had her folder ready as Tara lifted her head. From her standpoint, Charlie had been dead for over 20 years. She hadn't remarried. She never did. Cassingale, she said, as she remembered this place and all her past lives. He took me skiing this time. That was different. It was, he agreed. Does he remember? It always seems like he knows things before they happen. Does he remember? Cassingale swallowed and said, "Some people get glimpses. That funny feeling that only has a word for it in French." She laughed. He smiled. No one is supposed to remember, though. It's always like the first time. Tara said. If you choose to repeat your last life, it always is. She smiled wider. I think I'm going to go again. I know Charlie always goes again, and he would miss me if I wasn't there to meet him. As you wish. As you wish. Cassingale started the paperwork. Alright. I think we'll do one more scene with her. We're still under 2,000 words here, so that should be alright. She didn't remember the spot at the beach. She didn't remember any of it. But those lights, the music, the ocean air, and her mood drew her to the spot with a power beyond memory. This was a magic place. Then some guy came up to talk to her. There was always some guy ready to butt in at any moment. She hoped he was at least nice. He hoped he could take a polite no for an answer. She never got around to the no. He seemed to feel the magic too, and treated it and her with respect. She was glad she met Charlie that day, and she had no idea what their lives would hold together. All right. That is Meet Again. Again, the concept behind that story is that in the afterlife you get a choice to move on to a new life or to relive your old one. You're not supposed to remember your old one as you relive it, but Charlie has some kind of glitch in his system, something that keeps killing him off but also allows him to remember, and he gets to live his life over and over again with the woman he loves, remembering every life before. And it turns out that she gets a choice too, and at the end of her life she remembers all their lives together and chooses to go back to meet him again as well. So I think that's a cool story, and maybe with a little more work it'll be good. Hopefully my wife will enjoy it too.